If you're looking for your next quick sewing project, I'm going to show you step by step how to make this tote bag. This is the perfect size for a little trick-or-treat bag, or you could really make this for anything, a little book tote, a really fancy little gift bag for a host or hostess gift. I know the holidays are coming up, but let's get into it. These are the supplies you'll need. You'll need 2 of the top panels for the bag. These will need to be 9 inches tall and 12.5 inches wide. I made mine out of hexagons, so I'm gonna show that really quick how I did this. But you could just use one solid fabric, make your own patchwork, whatever you want. I used a technique called English paper piecing. I have another short tutorial on how to connect hexagons, but I used 24, so I have 6 columns of 4 here, and they're kind of staggered like this. When you're putting them together, know that the bottoms and sides will get cut off a little bit, all of the parts that are kind of overhanging, and I used 1.5 inch hexagons. I do have these available for purchase in my shop at joyintheseam.com, and they're packs of 50, which is perfect because you'll need 48 for this project. So once I basted the fabric onto the paper hexagons, I went ahead and laid them out in the layout. Again, this is 6 columns of 4 or 4 rows of 6, however you want to say it. And you can play around with this as much as you want if you're doing a really scrappy version, or if you're doing some sort of pattern. There's a rhyme or reason, however you want to do this. It would also be easy just to do like a patchwork square version. You could traditionally piece those, but I really enjoy English paper piecing. It's a great way to take sewing on the go. So I went ahead and sewed these together, and I just wanted to show that quick before we jump back into the supplies list. So once you have your 12.5 by 9 inch panel, you'll also need some quilting supplies. I chose to hand quilt mine. I really like the big stitch look, so I use these sashiko needles and pearl cotton thread, also available in my shop. Everything will be linked in the caption. We're using fusible fleece, so you probably don't even need to quilt it at all, but I really like a quilted look. Then you'll need a bottom piece of fabric. So this is the bottom piece. You won't see most of it. I wouldn't choose a directional one, but if you are choosing directional, add 1/2 inch and then piece 2 pieces together so that half of the bag isn't upside down. That piece should be 11 inches tall and 12.5 wide. Then I have these 2 pieces for the handle. You could use 1 or even 1.5 inch webbing if you'd like. I'm going to make my handles with 2 pieces of 4 by 14 inch fabric. Then this is my lining fabric. Look at how cute those little ghosts are. Again, if you're going with directional, you're going to want to cut it in half and piece 2 pieces together so that half of it isn't upside down in the lining of your bag. This piece of fabric is 12.5 inches wide and 29 inches long, so it's one big piece. And I have all of these listed on my blog, which I will link as well, so that you don't have to go through this video and think you have to write everything down. So next we're using fusible fleece. This is one side fusible. Also in my shop, if you'd like some, if you don't have some in your stash already, I sell it by the yard. You would need about 1/2 yard. The 2 pieces for the handle will be 2 inches wide and 14 inches long, and then one big piece that is also 29 inches by 12.5 inches. And that's it. That's all you need. So let's get started. First, you're going to start with your 2 top panels. You can do patchwork, solid fabric, whatever you like. Like I was talking about, I did these hexies. So I pieced them all together, and then I needed to remove the papers and go ahead and quilt it. Before quilting it, we're going to put the whole outside body of the bag together. So I'm going to need to trim these hexagons down to that 9 inch by 12.5 inch measurement that I was talking about earlier. So if you do patchwork, just put it together and then trim it down afterwards. Don't worry about doing the exact math. Just do something that is slightly larger than 9 inches by 12.5. If you're doing the hexagon version, I liked to kind of center it up. So half of 12.5 should be 6.25. So I'm kind of lining up that 6.25 line right along the middle. So there's 3 columns on the left and 3 on the right. And then the top to the bottom, so the top edge of the shorter rows of hexies and the shorter edge on the bottom should be almost exactly about 9 inches. So we're just trimming off those extra little half hexagons on all 4 sides. If you're just doing one fabric, this part will be super easy because you will just have cut your one rectangle of fabric. Like I mentioned, I think this would be a really cute little gift bag for a host or hostess gift during the holiday season. So watch out on my Instagram, Maggie Lamphere. I'm going to go ahead and make a Christmas version soon for that reason. But let's just get through Halloween first, I think. So once you have that trimmed down, look at how nice and clean it looks now. You'll do this with both of your pieces, both of the top panel pieces. Then we're going to piece them to that bottom piece there. So take the bottom piece and place it right sides together with the top. If you have directional fabrics on your top here, make sure that it's facing the right way and then fold it down on top. And we're just going to piece these two together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance from one edge to the other, and then press it open or down. With mine, I actually pressed it down because I figured that would be easier for my quilting portion because I'm hand quilting and I don't want too many bulky seams up on that top part there. And then repeat the same exact process with the other side of that bottom piece. So both of the top pieces should be right side up, kind of like the bottoms are both connected to the bottom piece there. So this is what that looks like. And then we're going to go ahead and grab that long piece of fusible fleece. So again, this is 12.5 by 29 inches long. If it's a little too long, maybe your 1/4 inch seam allowance wasn't perfect like mine, you can just go ahead and trim it back to the right side. If you have to do that, however much you trim it back, just make sure you do that with your lining piece. So go ahead and apply that fusible fleece to the outside panel here, however your manufacturer instructions say to do so, follow that. And then once you've done that, we can go ahead and quilt it. So like I mentioned, I hand quilted mine. I marked some lines with my Hera marker here. I really like using Hera marker on bag and pouch projects because you don't have to get the marks out like you would with a marker or a chalk pen because I'm likely not going to wash this bag right away like I would with a quilt. Let's ignore the fact that I was using my pressing mat on top of my cutting mat. Please don't do that. I don't want you to ruin your cutting mat. So with mine, I did straight line quilting on the bottom part of the bag, and then on the hexes, I just sewed 1/4 inch in from all the hexagon edges. I actually didn't mark those. I just kind of eyeballed it. You can do this however you like. I will say that when I quilted the straight lines on the bottom of the bag, I don't think I did enough quilting down there. I think I ended up doing them 1.5 inches apart. And once the bag's put together, you could barely even see any of the quilting lines because it's not a very large bag. So I would do more dense quilting down here if you choose to do that. And you can certainly quilt this by machine. That would be a lot quicker. If you're having issues quilting on your home machine, I always like to tell people to use a walking foot and up your stitch length. Just try it sometime. I like to use a 3.0 to 3.5 even when I'm machine quilting. And I also like to use a little bit of a thicker thread like aurifil 28 weight, which I also have in my shop, just saying. Anyway, you'll go ahead and quilt this as desired, and we'll come back then to put the bag together. It's pretty easy. The longest part for me was putting together these hexes and then quilting. So here is that panel. Once I've quilted it, I just quilted it right through that fusible fleece in the top layer there, and a lot of my knots and stuff are just on the back of the fusible fleece because that will be hidden later. So this would actually be a great project if you're a beginner to hand quilting because you don't have to worry about what it looks like on the back, where if you're quilting an actual quilt, you would probably care a little more because the back will be seen. So now that we have the outside of the bag ready, we need to make the handles. So I'm taking that 2-inch wide fusible fleece and applying it to those 4-inch wide pieces of fabric for the handles. I do this by placing the fusible fleece right along the center. There should be 1 inch on the top and 1 inch on the bottom. You can check with your ruler though. It doesn't have to be perfect, honestly. And then go ahead and apply the fusible fleece according to the directions on the package. Once the fusible fleece is applied, go ahead and fold in those top and bottom extra pieces of fabric in towards the center and then fold it again in half and press. Mine likes to pop open after I pressed it in half, so I like to add some clips at this part. And all I'm going to do is just sew about 1/8 of an inch from the edge on both long sides of this. You can do the little short edge on the bottom if you want, but it's not needed. You could even add another line of stitches, another 1/8 or 1/4 inch in for more of a decorative stitch look. I do recommend using your walking foot for this and also for the construction of the bag. I just feel like the fabric feeds through more evenly that way. And now we are going to put them on the body of the bag. In order to do this, you'll want to find the center of the top edge here, which should be about 6 1/4 inches in. And you can mark that with a pen, a clip, however you want to keep track of it. And then the handles are going to get attached on 2.5 inches on each side of that clip. I do leave an overhang for the handle. This is about, I don't know, I'd say about 1 inch past the top here. And those will get kind of sewed down at a later step so that your handles stay propped up. And just go ahead and sew the handles in place about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch from the top edge there. And I go over it a few times to make sure that they are nice and secure. Repeat this with the other side. Now this is the fun part. We get to put the bag together. We're almost done. And see what I was talking about with those stitches? It does not matter what it looks like on the other side of the fusible fleece when you're quilting this. So to put the outside body of the bag together, we're going to fold it in half, right sides together, and just sew along the 2 sides here from top to bottom. Again, I like to use my walking foot for this part of the process. I think it works better. At this part of the process and kind of all steps moving forward, just make sure those handles are moved out of the way so you're not accidentally sewing them down and onto the bag. Next, we're going to box out the corners. So to do this, you pull on the 2 sides of the bag and kind of make it a flat triangle at the bottom here. So you'll see the seam is at the top here. There's the seam. You can press this open before doing this too if you'd like. And next what we're going to do is measure 2.5 inches up from that bottom point of your triangle there. And then we're just going to sew along that line. So I take a ruler and I line it up, find 2.5 inches up from the bottom. If you have diagonal lines on your ruler, you can try to use that to make sure that it's nice and straight. And then go ahead and take a marking pen or whatever your preferred marking tool is. Mark that line and then sew right across the line. Once you've done that, you can trim this back to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you're left with this little piece here you can get rid of, and you have a boxed out corner. And then repeat the same thing with the other side. Do the same exact thing with your lining. Place it right sides together. Sew along the sides, but leave a gap in the lining, about 4 to 5 inches open. You'll see on this side here, I didn't sew it. So I sewed the top and then the bottom, but I left that gap. That's so we can turn it right side out when we put it together. Box out the corners in the same way. So you'll have done that 4 times with the corners, 2 for the outside, 2 for the inside. And now let's put the bag together. To put it together, you want the outside of the bag right side facing out. So you should have turned this right side out. And then the lining of the bag is still wrong side out. So right sides of the lining and right sides of the outside are facing each other. You put the outside of the bag inside the lining like this, and we're going to sew along the entire top of the bag. Your handles should be poking out a little bit, and that's okay. I'm sewing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance from the edge. You could go like 1/2 inch in too, if you'd like. And I start with the back stitch and just go around the entire thing. I like to sew mine like this, where I'm sewing kind of on the outer part of the bag, and then I just reposition it as I go. And I'm gonna say it again, I'm using my walking foot here. You guys have to use a walking foot. Please try it if you haven't. I come across so many people who aren't using a walking foot, and someone once commented on one of my videos, me and my walking foot against the world, and I felt that. I really think it's one of the greatest things to use. Once you've sewn around the entire top of the bag here, we can turn it right side out. Remove any clips or pins or whatever you were using, and pull the outside of the bag through that hole in the lining. And then we're going to kind of straighten out our lining. Don't put it back in the bag yet. We're going to close this hole up. You can be fancy and do this by hand with an invisible stitch, but I just like to tuck in the seam allowance like this. You can give it a press if you'd like, quick, if that helps, and just go ahead and sew really close to that folded edge here to hide the raw edges. There, now we can put the lining inside the bag. So go ahead and tuck that in, and I like to kind of shake it out, and then I use my fingers to kind of press down the lining of the bag and press these handles up here. And you'll want to just go around the entire bag like this, and then even take it to your iron and give it a little press too. And then what we're going to do is top stitch around the entire top of the bag about 1/8 to 1/4 inch from the top to kind of hold all this down, and that should actually hold your handles up then. So as you work your way around the top of the bag with that top stitch, make sure your handles are up and not getting stitched down. And then where we left that little overhang on the inside should get stitched down, and this will help your handles stay propped up. Again, I'm using my walking foot. I am using like a 3.0 stitch length for a more decorative looking stitch. And you could even swap out your thread for another thread that coordinates well with the bag, since the stitch will be seen. I just went around the entire top of the bag about 1/4 inch from the top. And once you've done that, take a look, and you could add another line of stitches if you'd like another 1/4 inch down. I just went with the one because I was so excited for my bag to be done, but I could always add more later. Speaking of, don't skip this step when you're bag making. I really think that it makes it look so much nicer to hold down the lining and everything along the top. I know you're so excited for your bag to be done, but it's really worth it. That's it. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like and subscribe for more free project tutorials and sewing inspiration.